He told me to get out. There was a time in my life where I hit rock bottom and I desperately needed assistance. Luckily, a friend came to my aid and told me about a kind-hearted family who agreed to rent me a room that they had built in their garage until I could get back on my feet. I didn't mind the makeshift setup. I managed to make it warm and cozy by putting up a blanket and a door to keep out the cold and maintain some privacy. Little did I know that this arrangement would bring about a profound connection with their daughter, Tracy. Our beds were positioned with only the garage wall separating us, and over time, Tracy and I grew incredibly close. Sometimes when her parents were asleep, we would talk to each other through a thin wall, our whispers carrying our thoughts and feelings. The house itself was a modest one, with 3 bedrooms, a single bathroom, and a garage in the front. It sat directly across from the Palmdale Mall. Upon entering the house, you would find yourself in the living room and kitchen area. A hallway led to the right, opening into Tracy's room and the other bedrooms at the back. One night, I woke up with a sense of dread engulfing me. Strange thumps and unexplained noises emanated from the other side of the wall. At first, I attributed them to Stacy's low-volume TV and her movements as she tried to get comfortable. However, I soon realized that it was Tracy herself that I was hearing. Her sounds resembled crying, as if she were sobbing into a pillow. I strained to understand her words amidst the distress, catching fragments like "no" and "go away" and "please." Then amidst her cries, she screamed out my name. I sprang into action, racing through the house faster than her parents could react. As I approached her room, which had its door wide open, I witnessed a scene that sent shivers down my spine. There, hovering above Tracy's bed, like a gray mist, was an eerie presence. She lay there clutching her blankets tightly, pulling them up around her neck. The moment I stepped into the doorway, I saw the image of a withered old man pressing his face against hers. His gaze suddenly shifted towards me, and as if it was an intruder invading their space, his face contorted into a twisted grimace, emanating an overwhelming sense of malevolence. Simultaneously, Tracy screamed my name again, even louder this time. I could feel the weight of its hatred. Then, like long strands of hair blowing in the wind, the presence dissipated, leaving behind a dark shadow that swiftly faded away. It was the first reach of Tracy's bedside, enveloping her in a tight embrace. I cradled her arms as her body shook uncontrollably. It took what felt like an eternity for her to calm down enough to recount what had transpired. She shared that she had just settled into bed, turning off the light of her nightstand when she heard something stirring on the other side of the room, near the closet. Tracy described how she sat up, struggling to adjust her eyes to the darkness. That's when she noticed a mist-like figure on the floor, slowly making its way toward her bed, causing the room temperature to plummet. Tracy watched in horror as a face materialized, with a full-bodied form stretching out towards her. It started crawling up from the foot of her bed, gradually advancing into her legs. Tracy desperately tried to move, but fear paralyzed her. She repeatedly told the entity no, but it persisted in climbing up her body until its face loomed directly above hers. In her own words, she said, "That face, he was smiling while he was choking me, stealing my breath." It was at that moment she screamed out my name. I couldn't fathom why Tracy's parents dismissed her terrifying experience. They brushed it off as a vivid nightmare, one that felt all too real for her. However, I believed her wholeheartedly. After all, they hadn't seen what I had witnessed. The following day, I mustered the courage to approach her father and question their reaction. I wanted to understand why they hadn't supported Tracy in her fear. He simply explained that he thought that she had an overly active imagination. He mentioned that they too encountered inexplicable phenomena frequently, but they had learned not to let it consume them. They even gave this otherworldly presence a name, Charlie. In the aftermath, we decided to string white Christmas lights throughout Tracy's room, offering her a sense of comfort and reassurance. From then on, she never slept with the lights off again. As the months passed, the weather grew colder, almost unbearable. The family graciously allowed me to sleep on a recliner in the living room, facing the hallway's entrance. They had placed a baby gate there to prevent their dog from entering the bedrooms at night. I didn't mind sharing my chair with the loyal canine. It actually kept me warm. One late night when everyone was in their rooms and silence enveloped the house, the sound of ticking clocks gently lulled me to sleep. After a couple of hours of blissful slumber, the rattling of the gate startled me awake. Assuming it was Tracy's father making his late-night coffee, a routine that he had repeated countless times before, I didn't bother to peek out from under my covers. But this time, I didn't hear any movement in the kitchen. Dismissing it as someone using the bathroom, I settled back into my sleep. Once again, the rattling of the gate jolted me awake, but this time it was louder, as if someone was deliberately trying to rouse me. The dog beside me began shaking and growling in response. Tentatively, I lifted the blanket, revealing a chilling sight. There stood the figure, hands gripping the gate, shaking it vigorously. With each forceful movement, the noise escalated and the dog's bark intensified. I expected someone to emerge from their room, drawn by the commotion, but no one came. I found myself alone, face to face with this menacing presence. Its face began to contort and morph, and though I could partially see through it, the sight sent shivers down my spine. In a deep, guttural voice, it sternly commanded me to get out. Trembling, I covered my head with the blanket, repeating, "Okay," over and over until the entity vanished into thin air. I remained awake for the rest of the night, keeping myself occupied by watching TV. Anxiously awaiting someone's awakening, it didn't take more than a few days before I made the decision to leave. The unsettling incident had shaken me to my core. Eventually, the family moved as well, though not for the same reason. I'm grateful that they did. As for the history of the house or the identity of the elderly man, I'm afraid I can't shed any light on those mysteries. Later on, I found work as a maintenance and painting worker for the real estate company responsible for the house. Whenever the property required repairs, I made sure to pass the opportunity to another colleague, wanting to distance myself from that haunting place. It wasn't her. My sister, she was unique, a person with extraordinary sense of humor, special in her own way, and the most loving individual that I knew. But beneath her endearing qualities, there lurked a dark side that we were all aware of. As the eldest among 5 girls and 1 boy, my sister held a special place in our family. She had a spirit friend during her early years, engaging in remarkably intelligent conversations with someone only she could see. Our mother even used to ask her questions that she couldn't possibly know the answers to, and it astonished our mother when my sister provided mature responses. She confided in me later, explaining that she felt her friend was there for her during the time when she needed support. As she grew older, her friend informed her that it was time for her to depart. My sister endured the toughest of times alongside our mother, witnessing her abusive marriages, subsequent divorces, and the constant upheaval of our lives. In some ways, I believe my sister developed an intense protective instinct towards our mother. It almost bordered on obsession, as she would go to great lengths to earn our mother's approval, even if it meant hurting one of us. We sensed a resentment for taking away our mother's attention, particularly towards my brother, who received special treatment as the only boy in the family. It broke our mother's heart when my brother got married and moved away, and needless to say, my sister wasn't fond of his wife. She did everything in her power to drive a wedge between our mother and their relationship. She also held resentment towards our second eldest sister, who always sought attention and constantly stressed our mother out. As the youngest of the family, I had a unique bond with my mother that no one else could break. Perhaps my sister resented me too, for having such a special connection with our mother. While my sister had always shown signs of instability, something changed after we moved into the house on Alexandria. During our time there, I shared a bed with our mother, and night after night my sister would sit on the edge of our mother's side, projecting negativity and expressing delusional problems that haven't even occurred. Our mother would cry, begging her to stop. I wonder if something attached itself to her in that house, although I can't be certain. Fast forward to the end of my sister's life. Our mother passed away at the age of 87 from cancer, leaving my sister feeling alone and devoid. While she would never take her own life, she longed to be with our mother in the afterlife. She had been battling her own medical issues throughout our mother's life, but now she felt there was nothing left to fight for. By stopping her treatments, she believed the end would come. We all tried to bring her home with us, but she refused. Consumed by paranoia, she insisted on staying in that cold, empty place. She would sit there, holding her mother's belongings, staring into the distance as if waiting for something. One night as I was helping her, she asked me to sit close to her. She said it was crucial, so I obliged. She confessed her worry, explaining that she was at the end of her life and felt like she needed my forgiveness. She confessed to having done things, bad things. I assured her that we've all done things that we're not proud of, but she insisted that her actions were particularly harmful and had negatively impacted my life. Though she didn't reveal the specifics, I had a strong suspicion of what she meant, as those events had indeed affected me negatively. She revealed that for many years she had felt a dark presence clouding her thoughts. Opening her hand and pointing to the top right side of her head, she emphasized its location. She said it was right there. I had also sensed something around her, but I had only shared my concern with our mother. In her final days, my sister suffered greatly. Unfortunately, I wasn't present when she passed. I received a picture from one of my sisters, showing my sister in her last months. Her eyes were wider than ever before, staring upward to the right above her head, exactly where she described feeling the negative dark presence. It wasn't a vacant gaze, it was filled with fear. Curious, I called the nurse to inquire how long she had been staring like that. To my surprise, they had only been using eye drops to prevent her eyes from drying out, because she had been staring for an extended period. What was she looking at? That image still haunts me. The night she passed, I waited until morning to inform my brother. Strangely, he didn't seem surprised and asked me about the time of her last breath. He explained that after turning off the lights and closing his eyes, something dark rushed towards him. It was cold and terrifying, and suddenly he saw my sister's face in his mind. He just knew she had passed away. It sent shivers down my spine. A few days later, my second eldest sister and my brother's ex-wife, who lived together, called me, sharing their experience of crashing noises in the bathroom at 5 a.m. Their dog wouldn't stop growling at the top corners of the room. They asked me to help cleanse their apartment, and I obliged. Now I can't help but fear that I might be the next target. However, nothing happened. Almost a week went by, and one night as I lay in bed with my grandchildren, my grandson looked toward my bedroom door and uttered, "No, no, no, spooky." He was only 4 years old. I didn't even turn to look. I reassured him that everything was all right and that our bed was covered in white light protecting us. I moved my hand as though waving a magic wand, enveloping us in this comforting embrace. He sat up and glanced around and said, "Oh, thank you," before falling back asleep. I followed suit. On the contrary, my son and his fiancée couldn't sleep at all that night. I keep a bright nightlight on in my room, so there was no explanation for what they exactly were experiencing. We live in an old farmhouse-style house, and my son's room is upstairs in the loft, with the doorway facing my room and the kitchen. My son told me that he and his fiancée descended into the kitchen and both instinctively looked toward my room to check if I was awake. In the doorway, they saw an absence of light, an absorbing darkness. They stood there, frozen in disbelief and overwhelmed with fear as they tried to peer into my room. It was as if whatever it was could not enter, but it stood mere feet away from my bed, lingering for a while before vanishing. Later that month, I took my grandchildren with me to my mother and sister's home, to place their remaining belongings into storage. To our horror, we encountered the same darkness, shaking us to the core. It made me question past events in our lives. Did this entity make my sister the way that she was? Did it play a part in altering the course of our lives? Or was the presence we witnessed in that house something entirely different? I hope my sister finds peace. What perplexes me is that everyone in our family has experienced warm and loving encounters with our mother. Some have felt her touch on their hand, a stroke on their cheek or back, and at times, caught a whiff of her perfume. But not a single one of us had been visited by my dear sister. It breaks my heart to realize that we truly don't know what lies beyond. Could she be trapped somewhere and we're unable to help her? Or has she simply moved on? I hope it's the latter. Someone shared a thought with me though, and I can't help but agree. They suggested when my sister passed away, the entity lost its hold on her. That's why it had been appearing in other family homes, searching for a new host. But it seems none of us were in a dark enough place for it to force itself an attachment. When she passed, one of my sisters remained with her, whispering spiritual affirmations, gently guiding her toward the light until she was gone. That brought a sense of solace, knowing that my sister was not alone in her final moments. It reassured me that she had the love and support and a guide to help her towards whatever awaited her on the other side. Yet the lingering presence of darkness in our lives continued to unsettle me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more answers to seek. I delved into research about spiritual phenomena, seeking explanations for the strange occurrences within my family. I reached out to experts in the field, hoping to gain some insight into what we had experienced. Through my exploration, I discovered stories of entities that attached themselves to individuals, draining their energy and causing turmoil. These entities thrive on negative emotions, seeking out vulnerable souls to feed upon. The more I learned, the more I realized that my sister had unknowingly become a host for such a malevolent entity. It pained me to think about her struggles and the dark moments were not solely her own, but manipulated by an external force. The entity had preyed upon her vulnerabilities and amplified her inner demons, fueling her descent into a darker state of being. It explained the drastic shift in her personality and the unexplained phenomenon surrounding her. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I became determined to protect myself and my family. I sought guidance from spiritual healers and learned techniques to cleanse our living spaces and strengthen our spiritual boundaries and ward off any negative energies that may try to infiltrate our lives. As time passed, the oppressive presence that had plagued us began to fade. The air felt lighter and a renewed sense of peace settled over our home. We started rebuilding our lives, proclaiming the happiness and love that had been overshadowed by the darkness. However, the scars left by my sister's tumultuous journey remained. The impact of her actions, influenced by the entity's manipulation, still reverberated through our lives. Forgiveness became a crucial part of my healing process, both for myself and for my sister's troubled soul. I found solace in forgiving her, recognizing that she had been a victim herself, trapped in a web of darkness that she couldn't fully comprehend. I released the anger and resentment that had lingered within me, choosing to focus on the beautiful memories of my sister's love and unique spirit. Now, as I reflect on our shared experiences, I'm reminded of the fragility of life and the unseen forces that can shape our journey. I've come to accept that there are mysteries we may never fully comprehend, but I find comfort in knowing that love and light will always prevail. Though the loss of my sister will forever leave a void in my heart, I hold on to the hope that she's finally found the peace and freedom that she longed for. And as I continue to navigate life's uncertainties, I carry her memory with me, honoring her unique spirit and cherishing the lessons learned from our shared experiences. One word: run. Prior to 2016, I lived in Palmdale, California. At that time, my sister, whom I affectionately called Honey, and my youngest daughter lived with my mother in a rented townhouse apartment in Oxnard, about 2 hours away. Every week or two, I made the long drive to take care of them, going shopping and cleaning their house. And as they were both disabled, my mother was the core of my heart, and my sweet sister had helped raise me, so I was always there for them whenever they needed anything. Let me describe the layout of their apartment. The kitchen was located at the back of the first floor, with a door opening to the backyard. There is a spacious area connecting the kitchen and the living room, and the front door was situated there. On the right side, we had the bathroom and my mother's bedroom, while the stairs were on the left, with a half-wall railing leading up to the first landing. My mother often sat on her lift recliner on the right, facing the base of the stairs. One night we were all gathered in the living room, watching a show with the lights on. My daughter was upstairs in her room, and we were sharing laughter over something amusing we saw on TV. In the midst of our enjoyment, I noticed something strange on the stairs. It swiftly darted down the steps, peeking up at me before hiding behind the railing. As it did so, sudden cold chills swept into the living room. My mother remarked the drop in temperature and pulled her robe tighter around herself. Initially, I thought it just might be my daughter playing tricks on me, but when she didn't pop up from behind the railing, concern began to creep in. I asked my mother, who had a full view of the stairs, if she had seen anything. She replied, "No, dear, I thought I did, but there's nothing there." That's when it hit me. I instinctively knew what it was and where it had come from. Without a second thought, I rushed up the stairs and burst into my daughter's room, demanding, "What did you do?" She stared at me with wide eyes, fully aware of what I was referring to, and started apologizing. I urged her to explain what she had done to invite it into our house. She proceeded to tell me that when her friends were visiting, they thought it would be fun to summon a spirit. They attempted to contact the deceased father of one of her friends who had passed away 2 years prior. However, something else came through, frightening them all. They promptly stopped their endeavor, and her friends ran home without even saying goodbye. I was furious. "How dare you play with something that you don't understand?" I scolded her. I acknowledged that she had good intentions of helping her friend, but I reminded her that I warned her years ago to never dabble in things that she couldn't comprehend or control. Not only did I constantly worry about my family's health, but now I had to worry about this supernatural presence. I asked her if she had at least closed the door, and she looked at me with a blank stare. Obviously, she hadn't. She explained that they had made a makeshift Ouija board out of paper, and once they were done, she ripped it up and thrown it all away. But that door needed to be closed. We gathered the torn pieces, and she called her friends. Unfortunately, 2 of them were too terrified to return, so when we had to proceed with the closing ceremony without them, and deep down, I knew it didn't work. The presence was still lurking, hidden. Given the circumstances, there was nothing more I could do at that time. Let's fast forward to 2016. I had an opportunity waiting for me in Washington State, so I begged and pleaded for my mother and sister to come with me. However, my sister, Honey, was incredibly afraid of change, and although my mother desperately wanted to join me, she couldn't leave Honey's side. Now, looking back, I wish I'd been more persistent. So I made the move, reluctantly leaving them in the care of my daughter and her now husband. Within those 2 years, my eldest sister, Honey, experienced a severe decline in her health. 8 months after I'd moved away, my mother shared the devastating news with me. She had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I flew and drove back and forth to be with them, and every time I visited, I showed them beautiful pictures of my new life in Washington State with its green surroundings. I urged them to come with me, but Honey remained apprehensive and declined every time. It broke my heart. In 2018, they both passed away, my mother from cancer and my sister from her pre-existing illness. Losing them took a significant part of my heart and soul. After my daughter and her husband moved out, they left all of my mother and sister's belongings in the apartment. Someone had to put everything into storage, and of course that duty fell upon me. Despite being the youngest of 6 siblings, I felt it was my responsibility. I made the drive with my 2 grandchildren, aged 8 and 4, because there was no one available to watch them for such extended periods of time. When we arrived, the apartment was in complete disarray. Dirty dishes and moldy food littered the counters and filled the sink. The floor appeared covered in a layer of soot, and my mother and sister's personal belongings were strewn about. In my mother's room, a barricade of trash had piled up, blocking the path to her door. In the middle of an open space on the floor, there is a full-length mirror hanging from a wooden ladder, a mirror I had never seen before. Overwhelmed by the sight, I couldn't help but cry. I set up a clean spot for the living room for my grandson to play with his tablet, and my granddaughter expressed her desire to help me. While I was bagging things up in the kitchen, I noticed my granddaughter standing motionless, staring into the mirror. Initially, I didn't think much of it, but she remained fixated on it. Then, without looking away, she spoke to me, saying, "Nana, can you get rid of this mirror?" I thought she wanted me to move it, but she insisted that it be removed from the house. Curious as to why she seemed so frightened, I asked her what had scared her. She explained that while she was looking into the mirror, she saw only darkness surrounding her reflection, no sign of anything else. It was as if she stood alone amidst the darkness, with something ominous approaching. I gazed into the mirror, not at my own reflection, and indeed, it appeared unusually dark. Without any further hesitation, I took the mirror outside and shattered it into tiny pieces, discarding them into the trash can. We decided to sleep in the living room that night, and it took us days to finish organizing everything. On that final night, we were alone. I had just finished mopping downstairs and locked all the doors and windows throughout the entire house. We settled in the bedroom upstairs, right across from my daughter's old room, with a new mattress laid out on the floor. I always left a light on in the hallway. As I began reading a book online, my granddaughter fell asleep beside me, and my grandson occupied himself with a tablet at the foot of the bed. As sleepiness crept over me, my grandson yawned and looked up from his tablet. His eyes widened, and he suddenly ran to the bedroom door, exclaiming, "Spooky!" He slammed the door shut and hurried back. Huddled as closely to me as possible, his behavior sent shivers down my spine, leaving me feeling uneasy. I could see movement in the hallway, dimming the light beneath the door. Swirling and peculiar shapes appeared, as if someone were pacing outside. Blackness intermittently surged through the cracks, accompanied by cool wisps of air seeping into the room. That night felt endless, and I remained on guard until exhaustion finally overcame me and I drifted off to sleep. However, I awoke hours later, needing to use the bathroom. Fear coursed through me, but I couldn't wait until daybreak. Slowly I opened the bedroom door, dreading what awaited me on the other side. To my relief, there was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was there. I could sense it. I tried to be as quick as possible, leaving the bathroom door open so I could hear the kids. As I rushed back to the bedroom, I heard a swoosh behind me. I slammed the door shut and lay there, holding the children tightly until daybreak. Later that morning, my sister called me. She couldn't fathom how we had managed to stay in that house. When I asked her why, she recounted her experience when she had gone to the apartment to retrieve some boxes of pictures. She had heard strange noises emanating from my daughter's old room upstairs. The sounds were so loud that she felt an overwhelming presence of malevolence. Every fiber of her being urged her to leave, so she did. She also revealed to me that her son-in-law, whom I had no knowledge of at the time, had been practicing black magic and summoning dark energy in that room. It was an unsettling revelation. Late that afternoon, we had finished everything, and the kids were already in the car, packed and ready to go. I just wanted to take one last look inside my mother's bedroom where she had slept. The walls held countless memories, and I hoped that if I looked hard enough, I would see her lying there, as she had done before. In my mind, I imagined her telling me not to cry. As I stood in the doorway, a chill ran up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood on end, and I felt something closing in on me. A warm breath brushed against my ear, and I heard a single emphatic word: run. I bolted out of the house with lightning speed, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. As we drove away, my granddaughter asked me who was standing in the upstairs window. My first real fear as a child. Let me begin by saying that we had an amazing and caring mother. She always prioritized us above everything else, and sometimes worked 2 jobs just to support all 6 of us. She did her best with what she had, and what she was capable with at the time. I also knew that she had a personal interest in spiritual growth, metaphysics, and occult sciences. It seemed like she was addicted to the sensation of the unknown. In some ways, it became part of our lives, and we willingly joined her on this journey. When I was 5 years old, I had a bicycle accident that resulted in the loss of my big toe. My siblings were instructed not to put me on the back of the bike without my shoes on, but unfortunately, my sister didn't get the memo. Being the youngest of 6 with 4 older sisters and 1 brother, I couldn't sleep in the same bed with my sister anymore because of the contraption I had to wear to keep my foot in place. There was a risk that she might accidentally hurt me while moving in her sleep, so my mother created a cozy pad with blankets and pillows next to the couch where I could safely sleep in the living room. At that time, we lived in a townhouse apartment in Hollywood, California. The living room was a spacious one with high ceilings. To the left, there was a wide-arched doorway leading to the dining room and kitchen. Strands of film strips obtained by my mother from her job hung across the archway like beads. Straight ahead, there was a staircase, and underneath it was my mom's desk. To the right, there was a long leather couch and my makeshift bed. The wall behind the couch was adorned with enormous psychedelic zodiac posters, which made her place quite groovy. It was the late 60s. We often experienced peculiar occurrences, though nothing truly frightening. Occasionally, we heard footsteps running down the stairs while we were sitting at the couch, or creaking sounds in the hallway. My sister and I even saw someone who resembled our grandmother standing in the doorway of our bedroom, silently watching us. It was too dark to see her face clearly. My mom told me that I used to talk about seeing angels and how I believed that I chose her before I was born, because she was exactly what I needed in my life. I might have some vague memories of those conversations, but most of them have faded away. However, one particular incident still lingers vividly in my mind. It happened one night when I was watching The Late Show in the living room with my eldest sister. She was on the couch and I was on the bed pad. Everyone else had already gone to bed. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, everything was eerily quiet. The moonlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting colored reflections from the film strips onto the floor. Due to the immobilizing device on my foot, I couldn't move. I lay there with my head resting on my arm, fighting against the heavy weight of my eyelids. As I gazed at the pretty colors dancing on my little fingers, something caught my attention. The color reflections seemed to be moving. I glanced up at the archway and saw the film strips swaying gently as the breeze brushed against them. Lying back down, I watched as they gradually synchronized their swaying motions. I wasn't frightened at that point. Instead, I was filled with curiosity. Then all of a sudden they stopped. Each and every one of those froze simultaneously. I found it incredibly intriguing. I propped myself up on my elbows, still lying on my back, and tilted my head to get a better view. The film strips started to separate as if someone was passing through them. There behind the strips stood a figure casting a shadow. It had a humanoid shape, but it appeared gray and lacked a distinct face. I sensed a masculine energy emanating from it. As it moved closer, I noticed its feet were absent. The figure crouched down just 2 feet away from my pad, on the floor in front of me. I remember pondering over why it didn't emit any light. Fear hadn't fully gripped me yet. I simply didn't understand what was happening. The figure came even closer, leaning over my head. I innocently looked up at it, and to my surprise, it was less than 2 inches away from my face. I could feel its icy breath on my nose, causing my eyes to dry up and my tears to stream down my cheeks. For the first time, genuine fear coursed through my veins. I tried to call out for my mother, but no sound escaped my lips. My heart pounded relentlessly, its rapid beats reverberating in my ears. I attempted to move my body back, but the apparatus restraining my foot rendered me immobile. The figure loomed over my small form, and I began to sweat profusely. It started emitting an otherworldly sound, starting as a low chuckle that morphed into a high-frequency, drawn-out screech, reminiscent of radio static. Then I felt an excruciating pain pierce into my big toe, as if a long burning needle was being driven into the bone. Overwhelmed by terror, I wet the bed uncontrollably, and a deafening ringing filled my ears. The room seemed to echo, and everything seemed spinning. I caught a glimpse of the room flipping upside down as it became engulfed in blinding whiteness, and then I lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness, I found myself cradled in my mother's arms. She held me tightly, repeatedly asking, "Baby, are you all right?" Apparently, she had a premonition and rushed downstairs to check in on me. She never told me whether she saw anything unusual. Blood was oozing from my big toe, and the doctor speculated that I'd intentionally or unintentionally ripped out one of the stitches while asleep, although I was certain that I hadn't moved at all. Recently, my sister revealed that her mother had the apartment blessed after that incident. Perhaps that's why I never encountered that entity again. All I know is that my mother never allowed me to sleep alone in the living room from then on. In fact, once my toe had healed, I slept beside her every night, and she would hold my foot throughout the night, ensuring my safety. Please help her. This happened around 2007, and I found myself deeply involved with a self-help meeting. Almost every day I immersed myself in these gatherings, dedicating my time to helping others and being of service. It was an environment that I felt like a second family in, where we respected and we were well loved. I even brought my daughter along, and she thoroughly enjoyed the camaraderie and experience there. Although I never went around sharing my own family's past or our paranormal encounters, I didn't want people to think that I was even weirder than I already appeared. So when one lady began talking about her haunted house during a meeting, I didn't think much of it. People often hopped on the paranormal train without considering more rational explanations like drafts or rattling pipes at night. I always valued the principles of cause and effect. However, my daughter leaned in and whispered to me that I should help this lady. I whispered back, dismissing her suggestion, assuming that she was just seeking attention like she had done in the past. Besides, this lady had never been the kind to be nice to my daughter or me, despite her efforts to be friendly. So why should I go out of my way to assist someone who has shown us such rudeness? Time passed, and one morning before the meeting, she walked in looking disheveled. I asked her what was going on, and she simply replied, "I need coffee, long night." I shrugged my shoulders and moved on, focusing on setting things up for the meeting. When the meeting began, it was her turn to share. She started by asserting that she was not crazy and that her house was haunted. People began rolling their eyes, but I found myself listening intently. She described how she felt watched in the shower, how the towel would mysteriously move, and how it observed her sleeping while shaking the bed. Then she revealed that her child refused to stay in the crib, screaming all night and waking up with unexplained scratches on his face and back. In that moment, I looked up from the paperwork on the table in front of me and saw the desperation in her eyes. Deep down, I knew she wasn't lying. My daughter touched my leg and whispered, "Please help her." Despite not considering myself an expert in such matters, I couldn't let a child suffer. I remembered what it was like to be in that situation as a young child, and even though I didn't particularly care for this woman, I couldn't turn a blind eye. After the meeting, I pulled her aside and offered to help, explaining that I needed to walk through her house to first get a feel for what they were dealing with. She seemed relieved that someone believed her. My daughter desperately wanted to accompany me, but I had always shielded my children from such experiences. However, she persisted, and I thought, what harm could a walkthrough do? I'm just assessing the situation. When we arrived at her house, she greeted us at the door with tea and cookies. Stepping inside, I noticed that despite all the lights being on, the room seemed strangely dark. Earlier, I had asked her to ensure the air conditioning was turned off and all the vents and windows were closed. As we moved from room to room, I sensed a tangible shift in density and temperature. My attention was repeatedly drawn to the bedroom wall. I asked her what lay on the other side, and she mentioned a closet, inviting me to explore it if I wished. Stepping into the room, I immediately felt an invisible force pulling me back. The torn pictures hanging haphazardly on the walls, a half-ripped Barney poster still clinging to its staple, and the general disarray made me uneasy. Suddenly, the closet door swung open on its own, accompanied by a chilling breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Hastily, I retreated from the room, closing the bedroom door behind me. Concerned, I inquired about the child's whereabouts. She casually replied that he was away. We sat down on the couch, and she proceeded to describe the details of the occurrences and their locations within the house. As we spoke, my gaze fixated on a particularly large fly. It was winter, an unusual season for flies. The insect hovered above her head for a while, then moved over to my daughter's head, completely avoiding me. This continued until it finally landed on my daughter's shoulder. Suddenly, a lock of her hair stood on end. She brushed it down with her fingers, looking concerned, as if questioning whether anyone else had noticed. I don't think the lady paid any attention. The fly then flew up on my daughter's head once more, causing a larger section of her hair to defy gravity. Reacting swiftly, I got up and excused ourselves, stating that we needed to step outside for a moment. The woman seemed frantic about me taking my daughter along, but it was then that I realized my daughter was vulnerable and in need of protection. I uttered a protective prayer and visualized surrounding her with white, comforting light before instructing her to wait in the car. Upon re-entering the house, the woman seemed like a different person. She had cleared the table where we had been sitting, which astonished me considering I had only been gone for a minute. She reassured me that everything was now fine, expressing confidence that it would all go away. Curiosity lingering, I asked her about her young son, the reason she had sought my help. Nonchalantly, she disclosed that he cried excessively, so she had given up and went to children's services. She seemed to brush it off as inconsequential. Stunned, I stood there, grappling with what was just transpiring. As I walked toward my car, the woman called out, "Hey, bring your daughter back any time." However, from that moment on, I rarely attended the meetings, and whenever she did, my daughter and I avoided her like the plague. A few years later, a friend informed me that she had spotted the woman at social services with her kids. Apparently, she had moved. I hadn't even known that she had more than one child, but I suppose that she must have just regained custody of them. Despite my personal feelings towards her as an individual and as a mother, I genuinely hope that they're all doing well. The evil that lives here. My name is Brandy, and I am a 56-year-old. I currently reside in Washington, reflecting on the experiences that have shaped my life and the lives of my loved ones. Over the years, my children have urged me to document our stories, as many of our family members have passed away, leaving countless untold tales. I don't want these valuable experiences to be forgotten, so I decided to share them with my children. Brace yourselves, for there have been numerous bizarre and supernatural occurrences in our lifetime, many of which were witnessed by others. Allow me to recount one such incident that transpired approximately 27 years ago, when my family and I were house hunting for a rental property. During our search, I had the opportunity to meet the previous tenant of a rundown yet habitable house. She vehemently warned me against residing in that particular house, especially with small children. According to her, the house was not only dilapidated, but also plagued by haunting entities. Moreover, she cautioned me against allowing any man to live there with me, as they would fall victim to the evil that resided within those walls. Initially, I dismissed her warnings, assuming she was either crazy or harbored some grudge against the landlord. Desperation led us to choose that house, as we were in dire need of a home. Furthermore, I believed that with my past experience and knowledge of house cleansing, we would be able to overcome any haunting. Little did I know I should have heeded her advice. The house itself had an old, musty ambiance, constructed entirely out of wood. The walls, ceiling, and floors were made of wood, and even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, painted on the other side. The front of the house featured French doors, leading into an enclosed yet open-viewed screen porch with the main living space stretching out as a long one, and the open area combining the living and dining room sections. Strangely, despite the presence of a heater and the location in the desert, the house remained persistently cold. Situated in the high desert of California, the house sat on the corner of an acre lot surrounded by barren desert. Across the street, there is a popular grocery store and a few small shops far enough away from their occupants to be oblivious to any of the disturbances emanating from our house. In bygone days, it had served as a town hall, and if I recall correctly, a turkey ranch before that. One particular morning at 6 a.m., we were preparing for a 3-day trip to Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. My 3 children, Michael aged 1, Penny aged 4, and Ginny aged 3, were sound asleep on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house. Wanting to pack in peace without disturbing them, I stood at the dining room table, folding clothes. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, sat across from me, keeping me company. Suddenly, we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. Raising our gazes, we witnessed my daughter Ginny, clad in her adorable pink and white flowered onesie, peering into the room. In a light-hearted manner, I said, "Ginny, you know it's too early, go back to bed." To which she responded in her sweet, innocent voice, "Me up now, Mommy." Her words elicited chuckles from both Opal and me, and I jokingly mentioned to Opal that Ginny must be exceptionally excited. However, I insisted that Ginny return to bed, explaining that we were not leaving at that moment. In response, Ginny stomped her foot with more force, causing the entire house to shake slightly. I exchanged a perplexing glance with Opal, realizing that something was off about the situation. Despite my attempts to calm Ginny down and convince her to go back to bed, she stood there stubbornly, her innocent eyes fixated on me. Feeling a mixture of concern and curiosity, I walked over to Ginny and gently took her hand. As I held her small, delicate fingers in mine, I noticed that they were unusually cold, almost icy to the touch. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to dismiss it as mere coincidence. "Come on, sweetheart," I coaxed, trying to hide my growing unease. "Let's go back to bed and we can talk about going to Disneyland when you wake up." But instead of complying, Ginny's face contorted into an expression of anger and frustration. Her normally bright eyes darkened, and her once cheerful demeanor shifted into something unsettling. She tugged her hand away from mine with surprising strength, and in a voice that was not hers, she uttered words that froze me in my tracks. "You can't leave. This is my house now." A deep, raspy voice emanated from her tiny frame. Opal and I exchanged terrifying glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. It was evident that something supernatural was at play, something far beyond our comprehension. I felt a rush of protective instinct surge through me, and I knew I had to act swiftly to ensure the safety of my children. Summoning all the strength I could muster, I spoke firmly, refusing to let fear consume me. "No, this is our house. You need to leave right now. You have no power here." As the words left my lips, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the nearby candles and sending papers flying in all directions. The atmosphere grew heavy, and a chilling silence filled the air. I could sense a malevolent presence looming over us, testing our resolve. Just as panic threatened to consume me, I felt a surge of courage welling up from within. I remembered the stories of my grandmother and how they told me about dealing with supernatural entities, and I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting our home. "Opal, stay with Ginny," I said, my voice steady but laced with determination. "I'm going to find a way to cleanse this house and protect my children." Leaving Opal and a bewildered Ginny behind, I hurried to the nearby library, desperate to find any information that could help me understand and combat the supernatural forces that plagued our home. Hours turned into days as I delved into ancient texts, searching for rituals and spells that could banish the evil presence from our lives. Armed with newfound knowledge and a sense of purpose, I returned to the house, ready to face the entity head-on. I gathered my children close, explaining to them that in the simplest terms as possible what was really happening, and assured them that we would all be safe. With sage in hand and a heart full of determination, I embarked on a cleansing ritual, moving from room to room, reciting incantations and banishing the negative energy that had taken hold. The house trembled and shook, as if resisting my efforts, but I refused to waver. Finally, in the last words of the ritual leaving my lips, the air cleared, and a serene stillness settled over the house. The malevolent presence had been expelled, leaving behind a newfound sense of peace. Over time, the house regained its warmth, and the unsettling occurrences became nothing more than distant memories. My children grew up, and we eventually moved on from that house, but the lessons learned and the strength gained remained with us forever. We carried the knowledge that darkness could overcome, and that love and determination could conquer pretty much the most malevolent of forces. As the years passed, Jeannie and Opal blossomed into remarkable individuals. They became resilient, compassionate, and wise beyond their years. We often spoke about our shared experience, reflecting on the power of unity and the indomitable spirit that had guided us through the harrowing ordeal. Jeannie in particular developed a keen interest in the supernatural. She voraciously consumed books about ancient folklore, paranormal investigations, and spiritual practices. Her thirst for understanding and her innate connection to the otherworldly fascinated me. Together we embarked on numerous journeys, visiting haunted locations and conducting research, and assisting others who were facing similar challenges. Opal, on the other hand, channeled her strengths into advocating for the well-being of children. She dedicated her life to supporting and protecting young ones who had experienced trauma or found themselves in vulnerable situations. Opal's compassion and unwavering commitment to making a positive difference in the lives of others inspired everyone around her. Our family's bond grew stronger through the years, grounded in the shared adversity that we had overcome. We celebrated milestones together and cherished quiet moments, and held each other close during times of joy and sorrow. The experiences that we had endured in that haunted house served as a constant reminder of our resilience and the unbreakable love that bond us together. As time went on, our story became a source of inspiration for those who had heard it. Ginny, now a renowned paranormal investigator and author, shared our tale in books and lectures, spreading hope and empowering others to confront their own fears. Opal continued her advocacy work, touching the lives of countless children and families, leaving a lasting impact on the world. Looking back, I realized our encounter with the supernatural had changed the course of our lives. It had shaped us into the individuals who had refused to be defeated by the unknown, who embraced challenges as opportunities for growth, and who believed in the power of compassion and resilience. In the end, our journey was not just about escaping a haunted house. It was about discovering our inner strength and finding purpose and creating a legacy of love and courage. And as our family's story continues to be shared, it serves as a testament to the extraordinary power that lies within each one of us to overcome the darkness and thrive in the face of adversity. The thing from my childhood home followed me. So let me start by telling you the incredibly bizarre and unsettling experience I've been going through lately. It all began when my mom and I decided to leave the house one day. We had just gotten new glasses and received prescription sunglasses along with them. Naturally, I grabbed them and headed out. However, upon returning home, I noticed that the case in which the sunglasses came was lying on the floor. It struck me as odd because I distinctly remembered leaving it in its designated spot. Little did I know that it was just the beginning of a series of strange occurrences. You see, my mom had to assist my dad in moving some plywood from his truck to the shed when he was building it. Her own shoes had fallen apart in the washer, so she requested to borrow a pair of my tennis shoes. Being a helpful child, I obliged and went to my room to retrieve them. Now I should mention I typically rotate between 3 pairs of shoes, my trusty Converse, my reliable winter boots, and my comfortable flip-flops. For months, my Converse had been lazily resting on the floor in front of my TV in my room. However, when I went to grab them, they were nowhere to be found. Panic started to set in as I frantically searched over every nook and cranny, even checking inside the closet. And guess where I eventually discovered them? They were neatly tucked away in a shoe organizer within my closet, a place designated for shoes I rarely wear. It was as if a mysterious force had decided to organize them for me. Strange, right? After this bewildering incident, I decided to join my parents outside and help them with their tasks. It was still dark outside, and it was around 6. Equipped with a flashlight, I accompanied them to provide some much-needed illumination. As my parents headed back to my dad's truck, I suddenly heard tapping sounds emanating from the nearby forest. Now I understand that you might think that it was just a bird or some other incident creature going through its business. Typically, I'd agree with you. However, this tapping sounded different. It was slow and almost deliberately so. And eerily quiet, despite being right behind me. It didn't resemble any animal I was familiar with. Now let me digress for a moment and recount an incident involving the scent of my deceased grandmother's perfume. You see, my mom and I were engaged in the task of cleaning the ceiling fan, preparing it for the seasonal switch in airflow direction. We needed to prevent the accumulation of dust, which would inevitably fall when the fan was turned on. As we stood in front of the bedroom door with the fan switched on, attempting to discern its current airflow direction, I suddenly caught a whiff of my late grandmother's perfume. It was a distinct scent that I associated with her only. Curious, I turned to my mom and asked if she could smell it too. To my surprise, though, she couldn't detect any of this fragrance. This incident reminded me of a comment that I had read in a video narrating my previous experiences. The commenter claimed that I had somehow managed to anger my grandmother's spirit, and she had transformed into a vengeful entity. Frankly, I found this notion quite laughable, as my grandmother was the epitome of sweetness, and I had never witnessed her expressing anger or malice. Now let's delve into the complex dynamics of my family. It's worth mentioning that my parents aren't exactly the best role models. My dad tends to be controlling and intimidating and verbally abusive towards both me and my mom. On the other hand, my mom encompasses all 3 negative traits while also exhibiting physical aggression towards me. The situation reached a breaking point some time ago when my mom threatened to kill me. That was the final straw, prompting me to move in with my sister. However, there was a waiting period before I could transition to her place. Thus, I had to endure an excruciating week in my old home, which turned out to be the genesis of some truly harrowing experiences. It was during this time that I felt encountered by ominous voices and experienced sleep paralysis. Initially, my mom was the one to hear the voice, although she couldn't decipher its message. It wasn't until later that I also heard it myself. On one particular night, as I lay in bed struggling to fall asleep, a common occurrence due to my chronic insomnia, I noticed a peculiar shadow at the foot of my bed. Intrigued and somewhat perplexed, I sat up, attempting to discern the source of this anomaly. To my utter terror, I heard a raspy feminine voice whispering, "Don't go." The shock of that moment caused me to lose control, and I began screaming for my mom. Despite knowing that the voice couldn't have belonged to her, I simply couldn't bring myself to walk past that menacing presence. My mom rushed into the room, bewildered by my screams, and I narrated the horrifying encounter to her. Fearing for our safety, we decided to stay up and watch a movie, hoping to distract ourselves from the lingering fear. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me and I fell asleep on the couch while my mom retreated to her own room. Now here's an interesting tidbit about me. I rarely manage to fall asleep anywhere other than a bed. It's an exceptionally rare occurrence, happening no more than 5 times in my entire life. On this particular night, however, I experienced another unsettling episode. Abruptly awaking from my slumber, I heard what sounded like twigs snapping. At first, I dismissed it as a mere dream, as why would there be twigs in the living room, right? But then I recalled the vivid imagery that had plagued me for the past year. In the darkness of my living room, I had frequently imagined a specific figure squatting in an Asian-style position, entirely concealed by a camouflaged blanket adorned with twigs and other natural elements. The only visible features were its eyes, which filled me with inexplicable terror. I had always visualized this creature situated near the corner of the wall, just next to the entertainment center, hidden from sight due to the TV obstructing the view. For some reason, I had been too afraid to confirm whether it truly existed or if it was simply a figment of my exhausted mind's imagination. However, during what I initially believed to be a dream, I saw this figure. Yet it wasn't crouched as I had imagined. Instead, it was standing upright, towering over me. Its height surpassed 7 feet, and I immediately realized that it was no mere dream. It was an encounter with the very entity that had whispered to me before. It approached me with a pronounced limp, each step resonating through the air like a woodland path being traversed. It drew so close that I could faintly discern its horrifying visage within the shadowy folds of its forest-like covering. The closest approximation I can offer is the monsters featured in the Doctor Who episode, The Waters of Mars, except this creature had a white face with black cracks, resembling a distorted mouth encompassing the entire facial area. Its pupils were white, surrounded by black where the whites of the eyes should have been. They were large and menacing, while its mouth remained agape in a silent scream. I felt an overwhelming surge of fear practically immobilizing me, and it whispered without opening its mouth, "Don't go." In an instant, it vanished from sight, but the fear lingered, keeping me frozen in place for what felt like an eternity. I had never before experienced such paralyzing terror, even though I had encountered numerous life-threatening situations in the past. In retrospect, I began to suspect that the shadowy figure in my room might actually be the ghost of my deceased neighbor. It seemed plausible that maybe he somehow was safeguarding me within the confines of my own room, perhaps even derived a twisted pleasure from the task. Curiously enough, nothing else in my room had ever frightened me except for the presence of a Scooby-Doo doll. I reasoned that the entity wanted me out of that room, enabling it to toy with me, as if it held no power within those walls. It appeared that this malevolent force only made itself known once my mother and I entertained the idea of leaving our abode. I couldn't help but wonder if there was some connection between the figure and the nearby forest, considering its appearance. However, I couldn't definitively confirm this hypothesis. As the days passed, I occasionally caught glimpses of the figure before finally leaving the house. On one occasion, I opened the medicine cabinet mirror in the bathroom, searching for toothpaste, and upon closing it, I caught a chilling reflection. The creature was staring back at me. When I turned around, it had vanished. Another encounter occurred while I was engrossed in playing Red Dead Redemption 2 in the living room. I glanced in the direction of my imagined spot, only to find the figure crouched there, silently observing me. However, the most unexpected sighting transpired when I ventured outside to check on a pair of stray cats. To my astonishment, the creature was seated in the driver's seat of my mother's car, choosing the most unlikely of locations to reveal itself. Upon relocating to my sister's place, a semblance of tranquility settled over my life, at least temporarily. My focus shifted towards settling in, finding employment, and establishing a stable routine. Nonetheless, on the 6th night of my stay, sleep paralysis revisited me with a vengeance. Once again, the figure materialized before me, standing tall while donning its enigmatic blanket. Slowly, it climbed into my bed, positioning itself directly above me, its face looming near mine. This time, it whispered, in a tone that seemed almost hurt, "You left?" as if posing a question. paralyzed and unable to respond, I grappled with the bizarre notion that this entity had somehow robbed me of my ability to speak, only to inquire about my departure. As its hands closed around my neck, it bellowed the phrase, "You left," repeatedly, relentlessly making it impossible for me to breathe. Eventually, I succumbed to the lack of oxygen and lost consciousness. Astonishingly, upon awakening, I found no marks or bruises on my neck, further deepening the mystery. Since that fateful night, the encounters have persisted, albeit in varying forms. The figure would manifest itself at the foot of my bed, either climbing or circling around while alternately whispering or screaming in that same pained tone, accusing me of leaving. I'm left with profound confusion and distress, grappling with the question of what exactly this entity represents. Could it be a product of my own imagination, a manifestation of my deeply troubled psyche? I am aware that my narrative may sound utterly unbelievable, and I myself struggle to fully accept its reality. Contemplating the appropriate course of action feels like an insurmountable task. Should I seek assistance of a priest, hoping for some form of spiritual intervention? Or should I admit myself to a psychiatric institution, fearing that my mind has become a playground for hallucinations and delusions? These are the unsettling quandaries that plague me every waking moment, and I'm uncertain if I'll ever find respite from this ongoing nightmare. Doppelganger Encounter. Just 3 days ago, an eerie incident unfolded before my very eyes, alongside my dear friend. We embarked on a journey to Walmart, strolling along a familiar pavement trail adjacent to the neighborhood basketball court. Little did we know that this seemingly ordinary expedition would soon take a turn twist, enveloping us in a perplexing web of enigma. As we began our leisurely stroll, a peculiar event transpired, catching us off guard. Suddenly, as if conjured out of thin air, 3 individuals materialized right before our eyes. Initially, we brushed it off, assuming that they were fellow trail enthusiasts. After all, this particular path was commonly frequented by many. However, upon closer inspection, our hearts skipped a beat. These 3 figures bore an uncanny resemblance to our close friends, down to the tiniest details. It was as if they were meticulously crafted replicas, almost indistinguishable from the originals. Ordinarily, this coincidence would have been of little concern. However, one of our friends had recently embarked on a journey to Georgia, while the others were known to be at their respective homes. A shiver cascaded down our spines as the gravity of the situation sank in. Something was amiss, and an unsettling feeling washed over us. Nevertheless, we resolved to proceed, albeit with a hint of unease lingering in the back of our minds. We figured there was no harm in continuing our venture. After all, the truth awaited us further down the trail. As we trudged along, engrossed in our thoughts, an inexplicable occurrence transpired. A voice resonated through the air, echoing with an uncanny resemblance to the timbre, cadence, and intonation of one of our dear friends. Startled, my companion and I exchanged bewildered glances, questioning the authenticity of the voice that we had just heard. Bracing ourselves for the potential prank or harmless jump, we cautiously turned the corner of the trail, only to be confronted by a void. Our friends, or rather the doppelgangers that bore their likeness, had vanished without a trace. Undeterred, we pressed forward, our curiosity piqued and our apprehension mounting. To our astonishment, we stumbled upon them once more, this time in the parking lot of a home goods store along our route to Walmart. Maintaining a safe distance, we stealthily observed them, hoping to unravel the mystery that enshrouded our once mundane journey. In scrutinizing their features, a disconcerting realization washed over me. Our youngest friend, the embodiment of innocence, stood at a peculiar angle. As I tried to discern his facial features, my heart sank. There was nothing, no distinguishable traits adorning his countenance. The absence of any discernible facial features instilled an indescribable sense of horror within me. Yet it was not just their visages that were twisted in an unnatural manner. As they turned around, their entire countenances contorted in ways that defied the laws of nature. It was as if their bodies contorted to impossible degrees, defying the very limitations of human anatomy. A sudden revelation struck me. The path they were treading mirrored one that we had traversed together nearly a month ago. Every step, every placement of individuals in that eerie procession mirrored our past journey with unwavering precision. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a desire for answers, we decided to follow in their enigmatic footsteps, our hearts pounding with a peculiar blend of trepidation and fascination. Turning the corner, we ventured forth, only to be confronted by an inexplicable void. The entities that had captivated our attention had vanished, leaving no trace of their existence. It was as if they were phantoms, figments of our imagination brought to life for a brief, spine-chilling interlude. Unable to contain my apprehension, I confided one of my friends who had supposedly been part of this unnerving encounter. To my astonishment, she reacted with sheer terror, her very being trembling with fear. What alarmed her even more than the inexplicable doppelgangers was the revelation that their presence on the trail indicated their proximity to our location. It was as if an invisible thread bound them to our lives, leaving an indelible mark on our consciousness. A collective decision was reached to shroud this otherworldly phenomenon in secrecy, transforming it into a taboo topic that dared not be breached. Yet, deep within the recesses of my mind, a gnawing unease persisted, fueling my desire for resolution. Just today, as I ventured outside to dispose of the garbage, an unsettling incident unfolded in the depths of a dimly lit alleyway. A voice, unmistakably belonging to that of my friend, resonated through the murky shadows, although subtly distorted. A chill crawled up my spine as I turned to face the source of the sound, only to behold 3 figures, cloaked in an ominous shroud of darkness. Their silhouettes mirrored those of the enigmatic entities I'd encountered on that fateful day. It was as if they were lingering in the ethereal realm, silently observing my every move. Filled with an inexplicable dread, I swiftly concluded my task, hastily discarding the refuse and retreating to the safety of my house. At present time, I find myself grappling with the concoction of emotions and uncertainty, curiosity, and insatiable thirst for closure. While I cannot categorize this series of events as a catastrophe of grand proportions, the enigma surrounding it lingers, and a shadow cast upon my consciousness. Seeking solace and understanding, I implore anyone who possesses knowledge or insight into this otherworldly phenomenon to come forth and shed light upon our bewildering predicament. For now, I remain vigilant, yearning for answers that might bring an end to this surreal chapter of my life.